Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Many of you have reached out to me via LinkedIn, emails, and WhatsApp asking for the YouTube tutorials on Apex programming. I truly appreciate your enthusiasm and interest in learning. So I'm excited to announce that today we are officially starting a series of tutorials dedicated to Apex programming. And with that, the very first part that we are going to take or we are going to learn today is triggers, Salesforce triggers, right? So let me share the agenda. What we are going to see today is introduction to Apex trigger, then the syntax of Apex trigger, right? How can we write that trigger? Trigger event, different trigger events. Context variable, what are the context variable that we can use in trigger? Trigger framework, we are going to talk briefly around that and we'll have a separate session on trigger framework, what it is and how we can use it. We'll share best practices as well. We'll share common use cases. Now, introduction. So Apex triggers are the scripts that executes before or after database operation get performed in Salesforce. Which type of database operation? Insertion, data update, deletion, and undeletion. Right? So these four type of operation can be possible in database. Right? Now, if you want to automate tasks or enforce some business logic, at that time we can use Apex triggers or any Apex jobs. Now, what's the syntax, right? So if you decide, let's say you want to build some automation when a record is inserted or updated or deleted or undeleted, at that time you decide to write a trigger. Then what could be the syntax, right? So it would be something like trigger is keyword, then trigger name, then the object name for which you are creating a trigger, and then all the events separated by comma. Okay. And now between both the curly braces, you write your trigger execution condition and call the helper classes to perform the business logic. Okay. So this is the syntax. This is how you would write the trigger. Right. Now, what type of events? As we see, right, trigger events that we have written. What type of trigger event? So triggers are written to execute the custom logic on the following events and which events? Before events, after event, right? Before inserting the record, after inserting the record, before updating the record, after updating the record. And here is the syntax as well. So if you want to write before insert or after update, right? If you want to perform something before inserting the record, or if you want to perform something after updating the record, right? You can write it down and you can separate the block of code as well. As you have seen, we have account trigger on account, before insert and after update. Those are the events. Then in if bracket, we have written trigger dot is before. That means when the trigger is running before context, then this block of code will get executed. And whatever code that we have written into trigger dot is after, it will get executed after the trigger, after the database operation is being performed. Okay. Now context variable. What are the context variables? So context variables are the system defined variable that provide information about the current state of records being processed in the trigger. Okay. Now this variable enable us to access, manipulate, or check data within your trigger logic. And we'll see what are the context variables or how which context variables are available. And here are those. The first is is insert, which will return true if the trigger was fired due to an insert operation. Same for update, trigger.is update, which will return true if the trigger was fired due to an update operation. Trigger.is delete for deletion, trigger.is before if the trigger was fired before the record was saved to the database, is after if it will determine if the trigger was fired after the record was saved to the database. Similarly, trigger dot is undelete is there for checking out undelete operation which is like we are undeleting a record from recycle bin, right? Trigger.new contains all the new version, like a list of new version of the record being inserted or updated. Okay, and it is only available while insertion and updation. Trigger.new map is nothing but a map like ID, comma, your record values. Trigger.old is the old version, okay, of record being updated or deleted. It is available only in update and delete triggers. Trigger.old map again, like a key value pair for each record, and trigger.size that is available to check the uh, size of the trigger context, like how many records came in, right? Okay. So these are the context variable. If somebody asks you what are the context variable anytime in your interview or something, just note that these are the context variables used in Apex Trigger. Okay. Now trigger framework. So we'll talk briefly around this and we'll have a separate session again for this because it's a bigger topic, right? So an Apex trigger framework is a structured approach to organize and manage triggers in Salesforce. It provides a standardized methodology to handle trigger logic, making it scalable, maintainable, and less error prone. We highly recommend you use trigger frameworks while working on Apex Trigger. And why we use an Apex Trigger framework? So it avoids trigger duplication. So Salesforce allows only one trigger per object, or we can't say Salesforce allows, but it recommends that you have only one object, one trigger per object. You can create multiple, but this is what Salesforce recommends. The framework centralizes the logic and avoids the multiple triggers handling the same event on the same object. Separation of the concerns. So it separates the business logic from trigger, making the code more modular and easier to maintain. It enforces best practices as well, like bulk processing, avoiding the recursion, and better error handling. And scalability. The framework can accommodate changes and new requirements without any significant refactoring into Apex trigger. Right? And testing. It simplifies the writing unit tests as well. Right? So that is what trigger framework is. Now best practices. Let's explore some best practice. Single trigger per object. Okay, as we talked about. Keep triggers simple, right? And use your handler classes or trigger handler framework for your logic. And we'll see that as well, right? Okay. Avoid SOQLs and DMLs in loop. In for loop, don't use SOQL queries and DML. Okay. Use helper classes to handle the logic, right? So this is the best practice for writing trigger as well and Apex classes as well. So best practice to write an Apex. Okay. Bulkify your trigger or code to handle multiple records. Okay. Use context specific logic to avoid recursion. As we talked about, if you want your code block of code to be executed before insert, then you will write if statement and check if trigger dot is before and trigger dot is update. Right? Now common use cases. Let's see some use cases as well. So auto-populating fields. So I am taking some common use cases. I'm not saying like you cannot use flows for this. You can do auto-population of fields using flows as well. Okay. But I'm just mentioning the common use cases, okay, so that you can understand. Then updating related record, right? Okay, where roll-up summaries are, let's say you have your relations between parent and child is not master detailed. In that case, you can't write roll-up summaries, right? If you want something to be rolled up to the parent, you can write a trigger on the child object. Okay? Sending notification, right? If you want to send email notification or chatter force creation, right? Again, you can use flow as well as trigger for it. And enforcing some validation rule that requires complex logic. We have validation rules, but consider like your validation spans across different records and different combinations, right? Okay, so for that you can write an Apex trigger and Apex classes. Now let's take a use case. So ECMA Corporation is using Salesforce to manage its sales processes. Sales rep frequently creates opportunity linked to the account to track the potential revenue. Additionally, sales rep generates proposal for these opportunities to propose pricing and product details to the customer. However, the company has identified that a recurring issue that sales reps sometimes attempt to close opportunities as close one without attaching a primary proposal. Right? So this leads to incomplete sales records and it creates the confusion during audit and it also impacts the accuracy of the revenue forecasting. To address this, Acme Corporation wants to enforce a rule that prevents opportunities from being marked as close won unless they have an associated primary proposal. Okay, so this is the use case, and this is how they want the opportunity to be close won. Uh, so this ensures that all the successful deals have completed and details are recorded so that it is mandatory for an opportunity to have a primary proposal before marking it as a closed one. Okay, so that is the use case. Now let's review it. So I have an opportunity called ABC Corporation opportunity, and I have multiple quotes with it. Right? Let's say I have one quote which is accepted, another is accepted, the third one is in draft stage. Okay, and I try to mark it as complete or close one. So I should get an error message, and I am getting that you cannot mark the opportunity as close one unless the primary quote is associated. Now what I'll do is I'll quickly go over here and I'll make this as primary. I'm taking this proposal example, but the object can be any. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll now mark it as close one. So I have a primary proposal. Now I'll mark it as close one. So I'll select this and I'll mark it as close one. And it got close one, right? Because we have added a validation through trigger, okay, which was stopping it because the opportunity was not having the primary proposal attached. Okay, so now let me go to developer console and let me show you how we have achieved this. So what I'll do is I'll quickly open up the trigger, opportunity trigger, which is before insert and before update. But I want my code to get executed before update, right? Because I'm updating something. So that's why I have written and used trigger context variable, which is trigger.is before and trigger.is update. So that means this code will get executed when the trigger is firing on before update event. Okay. Now I use handler class over here, and we are going to talk more in next session on this handlers. Okay. But over here, what I'm doing is I'm getting all the opportunities which I'm passing from here, so which got updated. Okay. From that, I'm checking if the opportunity is closed one or not, and I've created a example over here, or I have created a function over here which will return true if the opportunity stage, the old value of the stage and new value of the stage are not same, and the new value of the stage, new stage value is close one. That means there was some other status and now it is changing to close one. It returns true. I have just added a guard close like if it is not true, then continue, right? And then I'm recording the or I'm storing the close one opportunities into a set to bulkify the code. It is mandatory to bulkify the code if you or it is advisable to bulkify the code to reduce the complexity, right? Okay. Now we are checking if the set is empty, then we'll return. If it is not empty, then what I'm doing is I'm querying the opportunity with related proposals and I'm checking if the primary is true. So let's say if we get one record as a primary, then we are fine. We can close one the opportunity. And over here I'm running a loop on all the opportunities that we got and I'm checking, right? Okay, so let's say this list contains an opportunity ID. That means an opportunity is there, right? And then we are checking if the proposals list that is getting retrieved with this detail, if it is size is greater than zero, that means there is at least one proposal which is marked as primary, right? Okay. Then continue. That means we'll not provide any validation. But if somehow this condition is wrong, then we are providing an error that you cannot mark the opportunity as close one unless the primary quote is associated with it, right? So this is the way you can utilize Apex triggers, right? To provide validation, to do some updates on the related record, right? So this is the way you can write a trigger. You can make it, you can create a handler, call that handler, and you can utilize this Apex functionality to achieve anything that you want or any complex logic that you want. Okay. So thank you very much for watching the video. Please like and share the content and subscribe to my channel if you like this. Thank you very much.